So I take it that this week's readings may have been particularly confusing, but somewhat by design, because Davidson's position is a bit confusing, and the readings following Davidson were designed to sort of point out the confusion in Davidson. So Davidson's Anomalous Monism, he presented it as a position that would get around all the problems that we saw with dualism, with functionalism, and identity theory. Supposed to be a theory that accounts for mind and body interaction, the nature of mind, without inheriting any of the problems that face the other theories. And in doing this, well, it became something of a popular approach because of the weight of the problems facing functionalism and identity theory particularly. But then Sosa and Kim particularly are concerned with pointing out that it's not really that good of a position. It took on popularity because of the weight of problems of other theories, not because of the virtue of this theory itself. So Davidson says, well, look, there are three things that are true. One, some mental events causally interact with physical events. Seems to be true. We have thoughts. They seem to cause changes in our body. Two, causality requires there be strict deterministic laws. If we say that A caused B, we ought to be able to capture A under a type and say things of that type can produce effects in things of type B. If we can't give that sort of law, we don't have causation. That's widely accepted. Three, there are no such strict deterministic laws that can be used for explaining and predicting mental events. Now, part of what's supposed to be important here is that we've changed from talking about states to talking about events. That's supposed to be playing an important role here to get us away from dualism particularly. Now, Davidson says these three things are all true. They seem to be inconsistent, but this inconsistency is merely apparent, and his theory of anomalous monism is supposed to explain how these three are consistent despite their apparent inconsistency. And now, in addition to this, anomalous monism is committed to saying that all events, and that's what we're concerned with now, are events. All events are physical events. The only kind of events there are physical events. There are mental events, but mental events are just a certain kind of physical event. There are physical events that are mental events. There are physical events that are not mental events. A tree falling in the forest is a physical event, not a mental event. My going to eat peanut butter because I desire peanut butter is at least partially a mental event. That's also a physical event. There are no mental events that are not physical events. Nonetheless, mental events cannot be fully explained and accounted for as mental events in physical terms. Mental events are nothing but physical events. We can explain physical events fully, assuming we have a completed physics, completed science. We account for everything physical, which means we've accounted for the mental, but we've not accounted for the mental, only as physical. It sounds confusing. It sounds confusing because it is confusing. So largely what we're concerned with this week is making precise the relations of supervenience and of reduction. I've mentioned both before, but part of the task here, because the way, one of the tools Davidson uses to explain how these two things are not inconsistent, how mental events are physical events but cannot be fully explained physically, is in terms of supervenience. So we're concerned with making precise the relationship of supervenience and its relationship to the relationship of reduction. So I'm going to put a chart on the board that I put before, or at least something similar before. Here we have L. These are lower level events. Now what we're concerned with here is that these are physical events, but I'm not putting P because the higher level events are also going to be physical events. We also have higher level events. Now this looks like charts I put up before, but before when I put them up, the higher level, at least oftentimes, was the level of the mental, and that was an ontological area. The lower level was the level of physical, and that was an ontological level, so we had a dualism there. The highest level, one kind of substance, the lowest level, another kind of substance. Here, this is within the lower level of previous charts. All of this here is supposed to be physical. Ontologically, it's all physical. So we have something here a lot like a property dualism. We have an event dualism, but just as property dualism was supposed to be ontologically monistic, only physical, here we have an event dualism, but all the events are only physical. All of this is within the realm of the physical. Now the claim here, well, the supervenience relationship. So here we can have causal relationships between a lower level effect and later lower level effects, right? The tree rots, the tree falls, a lower level physical event causing a second lower level physical event. A striking of a match causes a flame. Something like this. We have higher level events. They're related to the lower level by a supervenience relationship or a reduction relationship. This is a causal arrow. This is a supervenient or reduction relation. And so examples here are going to be helpful, though here our higher level events are mental events. Our lower level events are physical body events for Davidson. Right? And he says, so look, this relationship here, well, there are causal arrows. Putting these in orange because they don't have the same status as this causation here. This causation here is physical causation. We can account for this by a completed physics. We can account for this causation by a completed physics. This right here is a causal relationship between the higher level mental property and a lower level physical property. Or here, between one higher level mental property and another higher level mental property. I have the thought I want peanut butter, so I have the thought I should go check and see if I have peanut butter. I have the thought I want peanut butter and there is peanut butter, so that leads me to walk to get the peanut butter. Davidson says that, well, look, here we have only physical events. Mental events are a kind of physical event. We can capture all of our physical events, at least at this level, the lower level in terms of a completed physical science. But if we did that, we could not capture all of these higher level events by that completed physical science because there are no strict deterministic laws here that connects the higher level to the lower level. There also are not strict laws here or here. No strict deterministic laws there. Causation requires strict deterministic laws, but we have them here. This does not, so says Davidson, ruin the claim that the mental can cause the physical or the mental can cause the mental, because this just is this. And so by giving this account, a physical account of this causal relation between this L1 and L2, we have, because H1 supervenes on L1, accounted for H1 causing L2 and H1 causing H2 in physical terms, not in mental terms. We've accounted for H1 causing L2 physically, but not mentally. To say mentally is to say that it is physically, but we have not accounted for its causation as a mental thing. We've accounted for H1's causation as L1, as its subvenient base. So now we need to say something about supervenience here. The classic example of supervenience and supervenience not being reductive comes from ethics with G.E. Moore. And G.E. Moore said that moral properties or higher level properties. They supervene on lower level properties, but you can give a full account of all physical things and physical processes and not give an account of the moral properties. So this is the naturalistic fallacy. That is, more said, any account to try to explain moral properties in terms of physical properties commits the naturalistic fallacy. It can't be done. This was a very big thing in ethics. G.E. Moore, through his career, was pushed on making precise what he meant, and eventually, later in his career, he admitted that he never could make precise what he meant by the supervenience relationship. Davidson sort of mentions supervenience, says what it might be, but he does not try and make it precise. He says that, well, to say that H1 supervenes on L1 is to say something. Maybe it's to say that you could not have two physical events that are indiscernible, they look to be identical, and have different higher level properties. G. Moore said this: you could not have two situations that were exactly the same physically, right? I pull out a gun, I use it to shoot you. There's some moral property there of badness. We could not have two identical physical situations. Tracing it back, history, it's not, if in one case you're attacking me and I'm defending myself, and in the other case I'm not, I'm going after you, well, those are different physically. If we could capture two events with the gun physically, and the descriptions of those things physically are identical, one could not be good and one be bad. The goodness, the badness supervenes on the lower level. So Davidson says, well, maybe this is what supervenience is. He says, or maybe it's that there could not be a mental change without a physical change. And previously, when I've talked about supervenience, that's how I've said, you could not have a higher level change without a lower level change. You could have a lower level change without a higher level change. Could not change a mental property about you without some change in your body. You could have a change in your body without a change in the mental by, say, your hair growing or falling out, right? Now, higher level properties, whatever kind we put in here, oftentimes are said to have a supervenience relationship. So say the beauty. The beauty of a thing is determined by its physical properties, or the interaction between its physical properties and us, which we could capture physically. We could not have two things that are identical physically in the identical physical situation with the same lighting and so on, and us be identical physically and view one as beautiful and one as ugly. That's not possible. It would violate supervenience. Or say I have two apples, they are physically identical in their microstructure. I could not find one of them sweet and one of them bitter. This flavor is a higher level property, supervenes on the lower level property, can't have a change in that higher level property without a change in the lower level property. So if I have one sweet apple, one bitter apple, it has to be the case that there's something different about them physically. Now if I say that my fiancée is attractive because she's beautiful, good, and yummy, what I'm saying there is something about her physically determines those properties, and then that determines me, say, wanting to produce acts to make her happy, say. What I'm claiming there, according to supervenience, is that it is something physical about my fiancé and my brain state when in the location of my fiancé that produces certain mental properties in me, certain action tendencies in me, so forth. This is pretty much Davidson. Because he does not make precise what the supervenience claim is, it's easy for him to say that whatever supervenience is, it would not be cashed out by a complete physical science. It's easy for him to say, without making supervenience precise, that it would not amount to a reduction of the higher level to the lower level. So this theory is supposed to not be eliminativist. It does not get rid of the higher level. It says these higher level mental properties exist. Identity theory, at least under some construals, was eliminativist. It said there are no such things as mental properties, not mental properties as mental properties. All mental properties are just physical properties. Get rid of the mental. If we talk about the mental, we're just describing the physical in a different way. That's where our sense and intentionality come in. Intentionality with an S. Functionalism said, well, there are mental properties, but these mental properties are functions and can be reduced to input-output relations at the physical level. Identity theory was eliminativist. Functionalism was reductionist. Dualism says there are two different substances. There is the mental, it's a different substance than the physical. Functionalism, identity theory, they're monists, they say there's only the physical. One is reductionist, one is eliminativist. Davidson says his is neither. You cannot reduce the higher level to the lower level because of the supervenience relationship. It is not a reduction relationship. Also, we're not eliminating them because we say that they are real and they are causal. Both they can cause the physical and they can cause the mental. But this causation occurs physically. The way H1 causes a change in L2 or a change in H2 is by way of its subvenient base of L1 causing a change in L2 or... Yeah, these should be blue because these are real causal relations, at least if we think there's the mental. Right? So those, if we explain H1 causing H2 or L2, we've explained it by way of this. And this, we can give a physical account of. These should be orange after all, because of the supervenience. Okay, so these are still a little spooky, these here. But because, well, if we explain H2 in terms of L1, I have something going in my body now and that produces a thought in me in the future. That is, the future thought supervenes on a future body state. That future body state is caused by my current body state, and that causal process can be explained physically. I've explained L1's relation on H2 by way of a physical process plus a supervenience relationship. Mental properties can't be reduced to physical properties. Nonetheless, mental properties exist and have causal properties. They can cause mental changes, they can cause physical changes, but this causation occurs at the physical level. We can explain that, but if we could give a complete physical account of the world, we could not capture mental events fully. Because when we give an account of causation physically, we have, in a sense, given an account of H1 causing H2 by saying L1 causes L2 and H1 supervenes on L1 and H2 supervenes on L2. But we've explained H1's causation as a physical thing. But it exists as a mental thing. That is a particular kind of physical property. We've used other physical properties to explain H1's causation. For H1's causation in terms of mental properties, that particular kind of physical property, a completed physics could not explain that. That's the claim. This also, so it's not identity theory and eliminativist, it's not functionalism and reductionist, it's not dualism, it's also not epiphenomenalism because of the nature of this arrow here and this arrow here. It says that the mental is causal. Epiphenomenalism, remember, says that the mental is not causal. It's just sort of a reflection of the physical. Okay. So still, we've got this account, and supposedly this makes all three of these claims consistent, though still they appear inconsistent, not if we understand his theory and how it's different than reductionism, eliminativism, epiphenomenalism, and dualism, an entirely new theory. There are only physical things. There are only physical events. Mental events are physical events, but mental events cannot be fully explained by physics. seems spooky, seems weird, because it is. Again, this became somewhat popular. It became somewhat popular because of the weight of the problems with identity theory, with functionalism, with dualism, with epiphenomenalism. Lots of problems with those. So we have something new, says it's a new contender, says it does not have those problems, exciting. However, there are problems it has, particularly making precise the supervenience relationship. Davidson said what the supervenience relationship might be. He did not say what it was. So Sosa comes in and he says, well, look, we need to make precise the supervenience relationship. Part of what he's doing. He does lots of stuff in there, and not all of it's terribly important. But he says, look, there are two different understandings of supervenience. One, weak supervenience. And I've sort of ran out of space on my board here. Well, L3 and H3 aren't that important. So, weak supervenience. WS, weak supervenience. That says that a lower level property, or two lower level properties that are indiscernible, they're qualitatively identical, those would be indiscernible with their higher level properties. Two L's that appear the same, that appear the same with their lower level properties, then they appear the same with their higher level properties. There's no way it could be otherwise, according to weak supervenience. And a difference, delta difference in higher level properties requires a difference in lower level properties. You could have no change in a higher level property without a change in a lower level property. This is weak supervenience because it allows for things like zombies. Now before, when I talked about zombies, zombies were things that were physically identical to me but lacked mental properties. Some think zombies are possible. Here we have something like zombies because you could have something that is almost physically identical to me. It could not be identical to me, that is qualitatively identical to me. It would have to be a different thing than me, right? So it's not strictly identical. Nonetheless, if it shares all of its physical properties to me, it has to share all of its higher level properties to me, all of its mental properties with me. But if there's one hair misplaced on my duplicate, there is a physical level difference. And so there could be a mental level difference. And so, while we could not have zombies in the sense that things that are physically identical to me without mental states, we could have something that is minimally different from me physically and yet not have a mental state. So we could have zombies. I look at you, maybe you are a zombie. That's possible. If there's a complete duplicate of me, atom for atom, that thing could not be a zombie. If the wind blows on that thing, messes up its hair, then it could be a zombie. So the supervenience here is weak. Strong supervenience says, well, in addition to, it entails weak supervenience. If strong supervenience is true, weak supervenience is true. But here we have there are no higher level properties without lower level properties. In the first, we could have a mental thing floating out in space. There could be a mind, disembodied, consistent with weak supervenience. Here, we can have no higher level properties without a lower level property. And if we say that higher level properties like minds turn on a certain kind of physical property, then we could not have something with those physical properties and lacking a mind. So a difference in one hair between me and my duplicate could not take the mind away from my duplicate. Because it is the same type of thing, and that type of physical thing produces a mind, then a duplicate of me with just a hair difference could not fail to have a mind. So strong supervenience rules out these zombies. It also rules out disembodied minds. Weak supervenience does not. And so this is ways of trying to make precise what the supervenience relationship is. Does Davidson mean weak supervenience, or does he mean strong supervenience? If he means strong supervenience, there could not be higher level causation without lower level causation. Ever. Davidson might be willing to admit this. This is not terribly useful for us yet. It's building up the strength of the supervenience claim. Sosa goes on to say a couple things, one of which is relevant. He says that, well, look, for Davidson, the mental is not causally relevant as the mental. Davidson says it is, but it's not. Because of the supervenience relationship, if we cash out the supervenience relationship, then we understand any mental causation is explained physically. Davidson even admitted so, that we can explain it mentally. Essentially, Sosa's denying this claim that we could have a completed science that explains the lower level and fails to explain the higher level. The mental's not doing any causal work as the mental. Davidson claims it is. Rather, it's doing physical work only as its subvenient base, as a physical thing. And so, since all causation is done physically, all the causation done by a mental event is done as a physical event. A completed science could explain that mental causation, so that mental causation is not acting as mental causation. It's acting as physical causation. Then he goes on to make a claim about supervenient location, which is kind of tricky, neat. He says, the person supervenes on, the mind, the soul, the person supervenes on a living body, your living body. And he says that the mind, the person, the soul is superveniently located in the body. And he talks about location of the surface of a table and how we explain that physically. And that's neat. It's neat because it sort of looks like it responds to the Cartesian issue of how we could locate a non-physical thing in a physical space. But it's not really a response to Descartes because he's not locating it, rather he's superveniently locating it. That's a different sort of thing. Just wanted to bring that out because it did take up a significant amount of Sosa's paper, and it's a bit tricky. Okay, so in comes Kim, and Kim says, it's a curious sort of thing that people have maintained physicalism when they saw all these problems with reductionism and eliminativism. Why not go back to dualism? He said instead they've done things like posit anomalous monism. And he says, well, but really, and he's going to go on to show that the physicalist must choose between either reductionism or eliminativism. And so we have three options for the nature of the mind. Either dualism, eliminativism, or reductionism. I'm going to write this because it's going to be important. Dualism or reductionism or eliminativism. And notice that Davidson's claim is that his theory is not any of these. His theory is not dualist. His theory is not eliminativist. His theory is not reductionist. Kim's saying those are your only three options. So even when he's not directly arguing against Davidson, he is arguing against Davidson. Because he's arguing for this claim that you only have three options. Davidson's claiming there's a fourth option. So, in order to evaluate this, we're going to have to talk about what reductionism is. Because part of Davidson's claim is that this supervenience relationship here is strong enough to prevent the higher level properties from being eliminated. It's not strong enough to reduce the higher level properties to the lower level properties. In order to evaluate that, we have to get precise about what supervenience is and what reductionism is. And so Kim says, well, reductionism says that all higher level properties can be mapped onto lower level properties. Maybe not now, but if we complete science, any higher level property you have, goodness, beauty, yumminess, a mental event, if I have a completed physical science, I can map those higher level properties onto lower level properties. That does not say I get rid of them, but I'm reducing them. To reduce them says that physics could account for them all. And the claim of higher level and lower level here is because of a dependence relation. The higher depends on the lower. The lower can give us an account of the higher could not give us an account of the lower. There can't be a change in the higher without a change in the lower. These sorts of things. That's the reason we put it mental here, physical here, as opposed to physical, mental. So reductionism says that we could map or account for all higher level properties in terms of lower level properties. We can map them on. List all higher level properties. I can give you a map of their corresponding lower level properties. And I can derive all laws of the higher level from laws of the lower level. If I have in place all physical laws, and I can map all higher level properties to lower level properties, then I can look at, say I have a law that says, well, as a matter of fact, L1 causes L2. Here I'm talking about types. All L1 type events or states lead to L2 type events. Say this is a law of science. It can be whatever. We can say that this is water with salt added leads to the salt dissolving. Something of this sort. If I can give this law and I can map all higher level properties onto lower level properties, then all I have to do is find these higher level properties, their corresponding lower level properties, in my statement of the law, take out the lower level properties, put in the higher level properties, and then I have derived a higher level law from lower level laws. Reductionism says I can map all higher level properties onto lower level properties. I can derive higher level laws from lower level laws. Forgetting something here. Okay, well, Davidson says that the mental is causal. Kim says, well, look, for Davidson, the mental is not causal at all because it's not doing any causal work. All the causal work is done at the physical level. Davidson admits this. He just says that when we've given an account of the physical causation, we've given an account of the mental causation, but not as a mental thing. Kim says, well, this doesn't amount to anything. If we've captured all of the physical causation, then we've captured all the physical causation. There's no more physical work to be done. So the mental is non-causal. It does not make a difference. It is not caused by other mental things. It does not cause other mental things. It does not cause us changes in the physical. And therefore, it's meaningless, and it seems that Davidson's position is pushed into eliminativism. If the mental makes no causal difference in the world, then there is no such thing as the mental. We could never study it by science. Let's eliminate it. Get rid of it. It makes no difference. I can explain everything. I can predict all behavior by physical laws. That's it. Kim then goes on to sort of an aside and talk about Putnam, because another main motivation for adopting something like anomalous monism was Putnam's argument against multi-realizability. This pushed us from identity theory to functionalism. But if we take there to be problems with functionalism, and our only other live option at the time, as was popular, was functionalism or identity theory, if we see problems with functionalism, like with Cummings, then we want to go to identity theory, but Putnam's argument against identity theory was taken to be very strong, and so functionalism problems, too strong, identity theory problems from Putnam, too strong, so we're pushed to something else, anomalous monism. Well, he argues against Putnam's account too. Putnam's argument against reductionism. And it's based on multi-realizability. One thing he says, well, look, identity theory requires us to be able to give an account of all higher level properties in terms of lower level properties, identify higher level properties with lower level properties, say that for any given type of mental event, there has to be a corresponding type of physical event that it's identical to. But the mental event of pain doesn't seem to work this way because octopi experience pain, but octopi have a very different nervous system than me. They don't have a human brain. And so pain can be realized by a human nervous system or a mollusk nervous system. This is not to reduce mental thing, a type of mental thing, to a single type of physical thing, and this is a problem because we can't have disjunctive laws. Kim actually buys that we can't have disjunctive laws, but he says still this is not a problem because Putnam, in making this claim at all, admits that for humans, I could say pain in humans is reducible to certain physical state in humans, and I can say pain in mollusks is reducible to a certain physical state in mollusks, and so what we have in that case is a local reduction. Now we could say that pain is identical to a physical state in humans, or, this V being an or a physical state in mollusks, right? That's what it looked like before. That was our disjunctive law. That was going to be a problem. A disjunctive identity theory was going to be a problem. But instead, what we have here is saying pain in humans is identical to a physical state in humans. Pain in mollusks is identical to a physical state in mollusks. We've made a local identity or a local reduction, and Kim says not only is this okay, this is all scientists ever expected in the first place. No one was after a theory of all kinds of higher level mental processes. Rather, they were after a theory of human minds. And in other sciences, we get local reductions or local identities, and that's fine. If we conceive of it that way, that we have two different kinds of pain, and they're identical to two different kinds of lower level properties, then we have two different reductions or two different identities, and that's okay. If we think that pain is one kind of monistic thing, and over here in mollusks it's realized one way, and over here in humans it's realized another, then we get a disjunction that seems like a problem. Kim says that would be a problem, but that's not what's going on at all. There are two different things. There's not a monistic pain. There's two different kinds of pain, and they're identical or reducible to different kinds of physical states. He says that Putnam recognizes this. He even admits it in making his argument, but that's all science was after in the first place. Then Kim goes on to talk about global supervenience, and he says, well, look, we have to, in evaluating this supervenience claim of Davidson, figure out what supervenience is. On top of weak supervenience, strong supervenience, he says, well, what if we say that this supervenience relationship is just global supervenience? And global supervenience says if you have two worlds, so we have to think about possible worlds. Philosophers talk this way. We could think about different ways this world could have gone. We could think about parallel universes, realities, in which there are two different worlds. If those two different worlds, or the two different ways this world could have gone, if they are identical in all of their lower level properties, then there's no difference in their higher level properties. So this is making this claim, this one clause of weak supervenience, but making it about everything, the entire world. Now what's curious here, he says, well, but this allows for disembodied minds. There could be something there. No, that's not true. We could have two worlds that are slightly different in the lower level, but not different in the higher level. And so we don't have a full reduction here. He says that what we're going to get here is something way too weak. This idea of global supervenience allows in too many different kinds of things. Does not give us the local sort of relationships we need. With Putnam, we need these local sort of relationships to talk about pain in specific things. Pain in a mollusk, pain in a human. That is much more specific than making a claim about worlds. And so sometimes global supervenience is appealed to when we're talking about laws of science, and we say something like, well, if you have two worlds that are identical in their physical properties, they couldn't differ in their laws. That's useful when we're talking about worlds and universal truths. But when we're talking about specific truths, specific to groups of things in a world, then we need something more fine-grained than global supervenience. So we're going to get pushed into something more specific than global supervenience. Maybe weak supervenience, maybe strong supervenience. Kim does not specify. He thinks he doesn't need to specify. He says, on the way to this, he says that, well, if we have higher level properties and they're not reducible to lower level properties, then they have to be causal. The mental properties here have to be causal. If the mental properties are not causal as mental properties, Davidson said they're causal, but they're causal by way of their physical causation. They are mentally causal by way of their physical causation. If we account for the physical causation, we've accounted for the mental causation. That's what allows those three things to be true, but we haven't accounted for their mental causation as mental causation. Kim's saying it makes no, well, Sosa said it makes no sense to say that there is mental causation there. Kim's saying, yes, I agree with Sosa, but if there is no mental causation as mental causation, but only mental causation as physical causation, then we have a reduction or an elimination. In order for Davidson to really claim that his account is non-reductive, the mental has to be causal as mental. But he says, because of this claim that all causality requires strict deterministic law, nonetheless the mental causes the physical. That's okay because there aren't strict laws of how the mental causes the physical as mental. There are strict laws of how the physical causes the physical, and so indirectly laws about how the mental causes the physical by way of the supervenience relationship between H1 and L1. H1 and L1. Kim says, look, if we have real causation here, real mental causation from H1 to H2, from H1 to L2, we're granting, Davidson grants causation from L1 to L2. He's also claiming causation from H1 to L2. If this is the case, we have overdetermination. We have an effect with two causes, each of which is sufficient to cause. L2 is our cause, our event that got caused. It is our effect. L1 is sufficient to cause L2. H1 is sufficient to cause L2. And the claim here is that, well, if the subvenient base of H1 were different, H1 would still cause L2. That's a Davidson claim. But Kim says, well, if it's really the case that L1 is sufficient to cause L2 and H1 is sufficient to cause L2, we have overdetermination. And this violates tenets of logic and it violates tenets of physics. It can't be the case that if I take out L1, H1 causes L2, and if I take out H1, L1 causes L2, because then we have overdetermination. Overdetermination does not work. Not logically, not consistent with physics. That's the claim. Trying to think of an example he gives here of this. Well, I mean, so we can think of the apple case, right? So if we say that the apple is yummy, that is a higher level property H1, and that leads to a higher level property of my desiring it. But I also say that, well, its yumminess was superveniently caused by its microphysical properties, L1. That led to a state in me, biological, neurological state in me, which had as a supervenient property my desire to eat the apple. The yumminess of the apple produced my desire to eat the apple. My physical state, the physical state of the apple produced a physical state in me, which produced my desire to eat the apple. There we have two different things causing the desire to eat the apple. The yumminess of the apple and my physical state. He says this doesn't make any sense because in that case you change my physical state. Take out my physical state altogether. Yumminess exists. Does yumminess produce a desire to eat the apple? It seems not. Take out the yumminess of the apple. I have the same physical state, that produces a desire to eat the apple. Yeah, it seems I could think the apple is yummy, but it's not. And I could still have the desire. So in every case that we describe like this, either the mental's not doing any work and it's just reducible to the physical, or it's apparently the case that the mental's doing some causal work, but then we have two things causing a single event, and this violates logic and physics. So on pains of overdetermination, it can't be the case that both the higher level property and a lower level property cause a single event. So, if we're going to be non-reductive, and we say, well, these higher level properties can't just be reduced to lower level properties. If we do reduce them, then we say, well, all the causation there was done by the physical properties. There was no mental causation, like Sosa claimed against Davidson. That's fine, we can save the case. However, if we don't want to make that reductive route and say, well, so here now the claim is whatever this supervenience relationship is, Kim says, well, two things are possible. Either this supervenience relationship is so weak that it doesn't capture dependence. Because remember, we said, Davidson said, even though he did not give us a strict definition of supervenience, he said whatever these higher level properties are, whatever supervenience is, these higher level properties depend on the lower level properties. Dependence. Kim says if we have a very weak view of supervenience, like global supervenience, it's not strong enough to capture dependence. I could say that H1 globally supervenes on L1, but that does not capture dependence. Davidson said whatever this relationship is right here, it is a relationship of dependence. Kim says, but if we make this supervenience relationship strong enough to capture dependence, we've also made it strong enough to capture reduction. And so if I say, well, H1 causes L2, L1 causes L2, this is okay because H1 supervenes on L1, and by that I mean H1 depends on L1, well, then I either say that I can reduce H1 to L1, and therefore all the causation is here, or I say that this dependence, this relationship is not strong enough to reduce. But if it's not strong enough to reduce, it doesn't seem how it depends on, so says Kim. And so, if it doesn't depend on at all, these things are just out there, completely anomalous, even more anomalous than Davidson wants to admit. And so Kim says, well, look, we started out with three possibilities, either dualism, reductionism, or eliminativism. If we want to make this supervenience relationship be non-reductive, then it's too weak to capture dependence. If it's not a reductive relationship, if the supervenience relationship is not strong enough to give us a reduction of the higher level property to the lower level property, then it's not strong enough to give us dependence. If it's not strong enough to give us dependence, then one of two things has to be the case. Either we eliminate the higher level altogether and say, well, there are, as a matter of fact, no higher level properties, or we say there are higher level properties, but without dependence. But to say there are higher level properties without dependence is to say that they are their own thing, they are their own substance. And so Kim said originally we started with three options, dualism, reductionism, or eliminativism. We've shown that because we can't make precise a dependence relationship without it being reductionist, then we have to give a very weak supervenience relationship. So weak that we only have two options left. Either the mental properties are completely independent things, they are their own substance, dualism, or they're not doing any causal work at all. They're eliminativists. We eliminate them. They're nothing. And so now we have returned, if we don't want to be reductionists, we don't want to be functionalists, the concern of Putnam against reduction pushed us to identity theory, problems with identity theory. Davidson came in largely as a response to reductionist problems. If we don't want to be reductionists, we only have two options. We're dualists or we're eliminativists. Anomalous monism does not amount to anything other than these because it depends on this relationship. This relationship either is strong enough to capture a dependence between higher level properties and lower level properties. If it is, it's strong enough to give a reductionism. And therefore, anomalous monism is really a reductive theory, like functionalism. If we don't want to be reductionists, we can give a weaker account here. If we give a weaker account here, we can't capture dependence of the higher level on the lower level. If we can't capture dependence of the higher level on the lower level, then the higher level is its own thing, its own substance, and dualism is true. Or we don't need this relationship here at all because there is nothing up here. We eliminate them altogether. And so Davidson tried to walk this line between eliminativism, dualism, reductionism, identity theory, and say, I have something unique. But the uniqueness, making all of these things consistent, required him cash this out. He did not do enough to cash it out. Sosa did a little bit, said it looks like the mental's not doing any causation as the mental, so all the action's down here. If all the action's down here, then we need to be reductionist or eliminativist. If we're not going to be reductionist, Kim says, we have to be eliminativist or we have to be dualist. So then if we go back to his three claims, causality requires strict deterministic laws. Davidson accepts this, Sosa accepts this, Kim accepts this. There are no such laws for explaining predicting mental events. That comes in right here. If we make these laws strong enough in reducing the higher level properties to the lower level properties, this is what I was going to say earlier. When we map the higher level properties to the lower level properties, we do that by way of bridge laws. If we have bridge laws, we can have reduction. If we don't have bridge laws, by way of 3 here, 3 denies that we can give bridge laws. We cannot fully explain and predict the mental by the physical. That's to deny reductionism. Davidson accepts this. Sosa gets around this altogether, so he doesn't commit. Kim denies this because he is for reductionism. He says if we accept this, if we do accept Davidson's claim that there are no bridge laws, okay, we've got around reductionism, but if we don't want to be reductionist, then we're either eliminativists or dualists. Causal interaction, problem for dualism. Obviously causal interaction is a problem for eliminativism because there's nothing mental to do any causal work. Kim says, everyone accepts this. If we accept this, as Davidson wants us to, Kim doesn't accept it, but he says if we do accept it, then we return to a problem here. Sosa was saying, this is true, but it's only true as physical. That is, it's true that some mental events causally interact with physical events, but only if we read this as some mental events physically, causally interact with physical events. Or some mental events causally interact as physical things with physical events. But if we say some mental events causally interact as mental things with physical events, that's false. Davidson thinks it's true. Davidson's position is called anomalous monism. That's an apt name because it is an anomalous position. Kim thinks that he's shown that it's not a consistent position. If you press it to make precise the supervenience relationship, either it can account for dependence or it can't. If it can account for dependence, it can underwrite a reductionism. If it can't account for dependence, then it's too weak, and dualism is the case, or eliminativism is the case. And so, all Davidson did, and all of the exchange from Davidson, reiterated the problems we've had all along. We have to choose between a number of theories. Dualism has problems of causal interaction. Davidson thought he got around that by making mental events quasi. And when you saw it first, it should have seemed, well, this chart looks a lot like the dualist chart. So it seems, but Davidson's saying all of this is in the physical domain. This is a sort of property dualism or event dualism, but ontologically it's all the same. Well, Kim says, well, no, it's not. If it's ontologically all the same, then there's nothing mental there at all. Or it's not ontologically all the same, this just is dualism after all. But if it's dualism after all, then Davidson inherits the problem that Descartes had, explaining mental causation. If we want to explain mental causation, then we have to be able to account for the relationship between the higher level and the lower level properties. We could do that by eliminating the higher level properties and having an identity theory. Higher level properties just are identical to lower level properties, but they're described differently. In that case, we have no problem with mental causation, because mental causation just is physical causation. Or we can do a reductionist, and we can even have higher level causal laws, but by way of Briggs laws, they can be reduced to, or they can be derived from, lower level laws. In that way, identity theory, eliminativism, or functionalism, reductionism, can get around the causal interaction problem. Davidson's positions can't all be true. This is false under dualism. This is false under eliminativism or identity theory, and reductionism or functionalism. So, Kim pushes Davidson to accept one. Now, accept one and be either a reductionist or an eliminativist, or accept 3 and be a dualist. He allows accepting 2. We all accept 2, but we have to choose between 2 and 3 or 2 and 1. If we accept 2 and 1, we have to choose between reductionism or eliminativism. If we choose 2 and 3, we have to be dualist. And so the anomaly of Davidson's anomalous monism.